So let's take a look at. We'll start with Darius. Darius from Kuala Lumpur. Okay. Now Darius from KL, Malaysia. He says, sometimes when times get tough, people say it is God's will, but I don't see why God would want me to go through things like financial struggles. Okay. So one thing I want you to understand is sometimes when times get tough, people say it is God's will, okay? Now, the thing I don't want you to do is, first, the discernment in your mind has to be what? It's like what today's lecture was about was you have to discern whether it's necessary or unnecessary. Is it from you, from someone around you? But just because people say it's God's will doesn't actually mean it's God's will. Sometimes we go through financial difficulty, not because God's sitting there like, go through financial struggle. Why? If you think about it carefully, if you really love someone, you're not wanting people to go through struggle. You have to discern well why you're going through these things, right? And just because people are saying it's God's will, it doesn't mean it's God's will. If I give you something to look at for the future, Darius, I want you to take a look at this Bible verse, and I want you to kind of meditate over it. And next time you can contact me, and I'll tell you what this means. But it's Romans chapter 12, verse 2. I want you to think about this one. It talks about what is God's will and how you're able to discern between what is the will and what is not the will. Cool. All right, let's go to another question. We're going to go to Jakarta, which is in Indonesia, right? Jakarta, Indonesia, and the name is Wijono. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. If it's wrong, please correct me. If anyone there's from Indonesia, but the name is Wijono, okay? And Wijono from Jakarta says, why do some go through more struggles than others? Okay, why do some people go through more struggles than others? And what I want to differentiate right now is the types of struggles like necessary, unnecessary. But even more than this, there are some people that will go through more physical struggles. It's just, like say if you go, like I went to Africa, I visited Africa three times already. And I'll go there and I'll see that there are some people like really struggling through some physical difficulties. I'll give you this one story about what is most important. I had this person in my church, right, and comes from a very, very poor background. And he told me that they were so poor that when it came to dinner time, his mom would call him into the kitchen, him and his two brothers. Two brothers would get up from playing, and they'd run into the kitchen, and they'd sit down, and but then he told me, when you go home, like say if any of you out there in the internet world went home today, and you open your fridge and you check your cupboards, and sometimes what do you say? There's nothing to eat. Now, is there really nothing to eat? And the answer is no. There's plenty to eat. It's just nothing that you want to eat. True, right? This friend told me, no, there's literally nothing to eat. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, yeah. So I was like, what did you do? Well, we'd hold hands and we'd pray. And I'm expecting some miracle, like someone comes to the door, knocks on it, and gives them groceries. I'm like, and he says, and then we'd go back to the room and play. I'm like, what? He told me another story. He was run over by a bus, but he couldn't go to the hospital because he had no money. So then I'm looking at this, and I thought to myself, like, what? So the obvious question I asked him was like, all that suffering, but were you happy? Like, did you? Are you happy? And he says, I'm happy. And the thing that kind of messed up my mind was, I was going all the way over to Africa, feeling good about myself because I can directly help these people. Like directly give them food, directly help them in some way where everyone else can just give money, right? But when I got there, I realized the problem was the same everywhere. Because if I go back to my home in like America or Canada, even people who have money, who have food, who have all these things, you ask them the same question and they'll still say, no, I'm not. So you have one group of people that have nothing, but we think to ourselves, they have nothing. They're going through this suffering, so they must not be happy, but they are. And then they look at the people over there who have everything and they say, they must be happy, but they're not. The true answer is the suffering that we have to solve that is more important than anything else in life is actually not the suffering of the hands or the food or all other different things. The suffering that we have to solve in this time is a suffering here, the suffering that's on the inside. And it's not just the suffering of us, thinking in our brains the wrong way or being negative, but it's also the suffering of, well, then how can I actually become happy? What is it? Why am I here? What's the purpose? Why am I going through this? Right? And I want, is this Wijono? Oh, no, it's not. This is Wijono, right? Yeah. This is Wijono, right? Why do some go through more struggle than others? We have to look and find out what is the real struggle that people are going through. Because just as we learned today, we have to discern between the two. And sometimes people will go through more physical struggling, but if they are sound and they are joyful here, they can still be happy. Which on the flip side is, I don't struggle in the physical realm, right? I have all the physical things I need, but I still struggle here, which means I'm still unhappy. The fight and the struggle that we have to discern, what do you mean by some people struggle more than others, is a struggle we have to figure out that's over here more than anything else, okay? Let's go to Cheryl. Cheryl in Singapore. All right, someone from Singapore. And the question is, how do I find my purpose if I'm struggling because of an external reason, something that is outside of my control? Okay, so if it would be great if I could get a real I don't need to know your real example, but there's something that is outside your control. Okay, so what would be a struggle that people go through that's outside of their control? One of the things is other people, right? Like for instance, I was talking to my pastor, and my pastor told me, hey, you shouldn't ride a motorcycle. And I'm like, I'm the safest motorcycle driver ever. And he says, I'm not worried about you, right? And there are things on the outside. I can be the safest motorcycle driver in the world. And yet someone on the outside can come and hit it, and it's not in my control, right? So for me, I have a couple of options, right? I can just become a safer motorcycle driver, or I can wear like a titanium suit or like a bubble suit, right? So that even when I get hit by a car, I kind of just bounce, and just bounce around. Or the safest or the easiest way is just don't ride a motorcycle, right? So it really depends on what, like finding your purpose. Finding a purpose is actually, I'm going to be honest with you on this one, is you can actually find purpose easier when you are struggling. Why? Because when things are good, what happens? You don't think about purpose. You don't think about why I'm doing it, because everything is great. The reason why people go up and down, right? When you hit a rock bottom and you're struggling over something, people either go really low or they fire back up. There's one of the two things you do, right? And it's because when you struggle, it makes you begin to think deeply about your situation. And I'm sure when you struggle, right? Because now you've already assessed that this external reason is outside of your control, which means you've already assessed it that, oh, I can't change this. You've already assessed that, right? So you're already looking at it, which means you've already thought deeply about it. You have to think to yourself, in the moment of struggle, that this is a time you actually begin to think deeply about life. You think deeply about why you're doing it. It's the same thing with people who get bitter from suffering for no reason. What happens? Because they're suffering, they think to themselves, oh, it's no fair. Why is it like this? Why are they doing this to me? Why is it like that? And if you start to really deeply think about it, or what I do suggest also is, if you have someone like a mentor who can talk you through it, this is when you're able to realize even more deeply about what you're going through, right? One thing I do want to tell you, this might seem cliche too, is in relationships or finding something very big, it actually, things get messier first before they get better. So, I don't want you to be afraid of the suffering that you're going through, but I want you to think deeply about, okay, now I'm struggling. Why? Right? What should I aim for? What should I struggle for? What's worth struggling for? Because when you're positive, you'll struggle for anything. Like, oh no, everything's okay. I'll do this or that. When things are okay, people ask you to do things, you're like, sure. When you're not doing well, people ask you to do things, you're like, I'll pray about it. Right? So when you're struggling, it's a good time to really reflect and consider. And I think you're in a good position to actually think more deeply about what is a personal purpose you're having in your life. Cool. All right. From Sabah. From Sabah. Okay. Kailin from Sabah, which is also in Malaysia. Sabah, very nice island. I was there just maybe a month ago. And the question from Kailin, right? It says, what was one suffering you went through that you felt was totally worth it? Okay, I'm going to give you something back from high school, okay? Back from high school, when I told you I was like student union president. And what happens was, in the beginning, I actually didn't, like, people kept telling me, you should do it, you should do it, you should do it. And I was like, no, no, no. And one of the reasons why I didn't want to do it, because it took a lot of work to campaign. Like, you're making signs. You're doing these. It's like, do I really have to campaign and, like, show my, like, hey, vote for me, right? It's like this is like, I don't want to go through. It's just too much suffering. It's just too much suffering. And I had a couple of friends, and the student union president came to me and says, you've got to do it. You've got to do this. And I was like, man, but my friend is the other one running. Like, I'm going to run against my friend, right? And eventually, I gave in, not because I really wanted to do it, because I wanted to stop suffering from people who kept telling me to do it. They kept telling me, like, I'm suffering. Why do you keep telling me? I'm like, you know that last one, you're like, fine, I'll do it. And then, craziest part was, I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I don't want so many people to help me with it. So I did all the posters by myself. I'm going to be honest, they were lame. They were so lame, okay? When I look at it now, people saw it and they thought it was it was so lame, it was funny that they voted for me. It was so weird. But all the hours and hours I put in, and then I became student union, the president at that time, for me, all that suffering I went through was worth it. Right? Because even though it was so hard, in the end, when I actually got voted in, right? When you're in high school, you do look for some validation and appreciation in life. For me, it did give me some validation that I was cool. Okay, well, either way, that's from high school, right? I would say, yeah, there's a lot of things. Like, for me, because especially I'm also a pastor. Not also, I am a pastor, right? So a lot of different experiences I've had as I've done missions trips over like 23 countries also. And I would say one of the things that are really, really fulfilling is when you meet someone who is struggling and going through so much and they've lost hope, but you can sit down with them, you can talk to them and pray for them, and in the end they turn around and they're living a joyful life. And I would say that's happened several times in my life, and I would say that's not just one of the most I would say that's one of the most fulfilling things that I've been through. Okay, let's just go through one or two more questions. Let's take a look at Deborah in Singapore. Another Singaporean. Deborah, how can I discern when my struggles are God's will and when is it my own or others' doing? Okay, so as I said to Darius above, there's an actual verse. It's called, it's Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Something I really want you to read, but in it tells you what God's will is, and it gives you 3 characteristics of God's will, and basically the verse tells you this is how you test God's will. This is how you test it. And when you read that verse, it's going to give you 3 characteristics of what God's will is like, and you can test everything to those 3 things. And then you'll know, this is, or this is not. Okay? I hope that helps a lot. We'll go last question for the day. Last question, we're going to Yoko in Singapore. And Yoko says, how do I make myself think more positively? This is interesting because science proves even if you don't feel positive, even if you're not really even like, you don't feel it, you're still inside, you don't feel very good, science shows that if you keep saying it, you begin to believe it. You have to force yourself to keep saying it. It's just the way it works. Like the way that your body, some people say, hey, you have to change from the inside out. And that's true. However, to initiate the change from the inside, actually from the outside, you can change it too first, initiating it. I'll give you like 2 studies. Like one we just said is when you constantly talk positively, say positive things to yourself all the time, then you begin to believe it. You begin to become positive, even if you don't feel it in the beginning. Second thing is, so that's the outside affecting the inside, right? The second thing is your body posture is important. You're like, what? There's some positions called power positions. Like, power position is Wonder Woman. Right? Stand with your like legs out like this, Wonder Woman. Right? You have like power positions when you're like hands on the table, like this. Right? That is a power position. That's a power position. Now, interesting thing is, they did research where people held a power position for just 2 minutes. Then they gave them a risk survey, and people who were in power positions were more than like 60, almost 70% more likely to take risks than people who were in weak positions and positions that are very weak. Your body posture can actually change the way you think and your mentality and your attitude, right? And that's why when they say fake it till you make it, it's actually true. As crazy as that sounds, right? Fake it till you make it, yeah, put yourself in a good position, okay? I hope that this helps everyone when it comes to suffering. I hope that everyone got the good 3 points this week. And hopefully, once again, we'll see you again next week. Everyone, have a wonderful time. And, just chime in. Tell me what your favorite bubble tea is. And I'm going to buy it. I'm going to try it out the next time we have a bubble talk. All right, see you later. Bye-bye.